The night was quiet in the Wild West, but when the rancher pulled away the blanket, he wished he hadn't. Under the burning sun of New Mexico in the year 1878, a man lived far from towns and noise, a rancher whose days were spent with cattle and silence, and whose nights were haunted by memories he could never escape. People in nearby settlements spoke of his honesty, his quiet strength, and his willingness to help a stranger on the road. But behind that weathered face and steady hands lay scars no eye could see, scars carved into his soul by years of war and the heavy loss of those he once loved. For he had buried friends and family under the same dry soil that now fed his land, and though the wind carried the smell of mesquite and dust, it also carried whispers of loneliness that clung to him like shadows. And deep within he carried a secret hope that one day, something would give him reason to believe in life again. That night the wind turned wild, sweeping dust and thunder across the endless plains, and the rancher, standing on his porch with a lantern in hand, felt the storm press heavy against his chest, as if warning him of something unseen, until through the sheets of rain he caught sight of a figure at the gate, a fragile body collapsing against the wooden post as, if every last step had drained the life from her. He rushed forward, boots sinking into the wet earth, and when he reached her, he found a young woman soaked to the bone, her dress torn by rough hands and jagged branches, her face pale as moonlight, lips trembling with words she could barely form, and when at last they came, they cut deeper than the storm itself. "Just kill me fast," she whispered, her voice so faint it nearly vanished in the roar of thunder, yet sharp enough to freeze the blood in his veins. For here was not a stranger merely seeking shelter but a soul hunted by cruelty, shaking violently as though fear itself had grown claws inside her chest. He lifted her carefully, his calloused hands steady though his heart pounded against his ribs, and carried her past the creaking gate through the storm, into the dim light of his cabin, where shadows danced like restless spirits on the walls. And as he laid her on the worn cot by the fire, he could feel the weight of her suffering, more than the weight of her body, every ragged breath she drew echoing with unspoken horrors, her skin cold and fragile under the wet cloth clinging to her frame, her eyes darting like a wounded animal's, searching for a mercy she no longer believed in. And though she had begged for death, he could not answer such a plea, for something inside him, something buried beneath years of silence and sorrow, stirred awake as he looked at her, knowing with a certainty as fierce as the storm. Outside that fate had placed her at his gate, not to be abandoned but to be carried. Though he did not yet know what price such a burden would demand of him, he pulled a heavy wool blanket from the trunk near the hearth and draped it gently over her trembling frame, the fire casting a faint glow across her wet skin as he knelt beside the bed, his rough hands unsure of how much comfort they could give, and for a moment he thought perhaps warmth and rest would be enough. But as her body shook with each shallow breath, he felt a dread crawl up his spine, urging him to know the truth of what she had endured. With hesitant fingers, he folded the blanket back just enough to see, and when his eyes fell upon her back, the lantern in his hand nearly slipped. For what lay before him was a map of cruelty carved into fragile flesh, lash marks running like rivers of pain across her shoulders, burns seared deep into skin that had once belonged to someone innocent, and bruises dark and uneven spreading over every curve, as if she had been struck without mercy, without pause, without reason beyond another's desire to break her spirit. And the sight wrenched the air from his chest, leaving him frozen between rage and sorrow. For no war he had fought, no wound he had carried, compared to the savagery written across her body. She stirred faintly under his gaze, a low moan escaping her lips as though even in unconsciousness, her suffering reached for release, and he quickly drew the blanket back over her, ashamed of his intrusion yet unable to erase the vision from his mind, his fists clenching at the thought of the hands that had inflicted such torment, his throat tightening with questions he dared not speak, because the answer might tear open wounds in both of them. And as the storm outside rattled the cabin walls, he sat beside her bed, eyes locked on the fire that hissed and cracked as if sharing his fury, silently vowing that whatever cruelty had chased her to his gate would not touch her here again, even if it meant standing alone against the darkness that had marked her. For in that moment the rancher understood that the horror he had uncovered was not just hers to carry anymore, it had become his as well. Her lips moved beneath the shadow of the blanket, at first no sound but a broken breath. Then words rose like fragments of a dream too heavy to hold, and he leaned closer, hearing a voice cracked by sorrow yet sharp with memory, whispering that once she had been the daughter of a proud settler, family who built their home with sweat and faith upon wide acres of golden grass, a place where mornings rang with her, brother's laughter and her mother's songs, carried through the kitchen door, until one night the land that had promised them life was swallowed by fire and guns, when outlaws stormed the ranch with a hunger, not just for cattle or coin but for power. And she watched her brothers fall to bullets before they could lift a hand in defense, their bodies crumpling into the dirt that only hours earlier had held their footprints, while her mother's cries were silenced in the smoke and chaos, leaving her clinging to the last wall of the house that crumbled around her. Her voice shook as she told how they dragged her away, not to end her life but to strip her of everything that made it worth living. And each day that followed became a blur of cruelty, her spirit battered as her body bore the marks of men who carried no honor, no mercy, and no fear of God, until at last she broke free in the darkness of another raid, running barefoot across thorn and stone with only the storm for cover, believing that if death found her in the desert, it would still be kinder than the hands she had fled. And now lying in his bed, she let the tears spill at last, confessing she had prayed only for the strength to reach a place where someone might hear her last words. And that was why her plea at the gate had been for him to finish what they had begun. But as her broken story filled the silence between them, the rancher felt the fire within him rise, for her suffering had not ended in the telling. It had only begun to live inside him, a wound that was no longer hers alone. And while the storm outside beat against the cabin walls, he sat in stillness, every muscle tense, knowing that what she carried on her skin was proof of a cruelty he could not allow to breathe another day. Her tears slowed, but her voice grew heavier, and with eyes that seemed too tired to hold, "The weight of another dawn," she whispered again, that he should end her misery, that he should give her the release no one else had allowed. And the words struck him deeper than any blade could, for they awakened ghosts he had tried for years to bury. The face of a woman he once loved appearing before him in the dim light of the cabin, a woman he had sworn to protect but had lost when outlaws raided his camp long ago, her cries echoing in memory like thunder rolling through his chest. And he felt the same helplessness clawing at him now, the same cruel question of whether he was cursed to fail, every soul who looked to him for shelter, his hands tightening as if gripping reins in a storm, while his heart begged for a direction he could not find. And though part of him wanted to grant her wish, to end her suffering swiftly, another part raged against the thought, for he knew that to take her life would be to surrender to the very evil that had already stolen her family. And his voice, rough and strained, rose against the silence as he told her he could not, that he would not, because to kill her would be to let them win again. Yet even as the words left his lips, he felt the doubt creep in, reminding him how once before his promises had meant nothing when death came too fast, reminding him that perhaps fate was mocking him now by placing another fragile life in his hands. And as the fire crackled low, he closed his eyes, seeing the battlefield, hearing the cries, feeling the heat of flames that had burned away his past. And he wondered if he was strong enough to bear the weight of this moment. For every breath she drew seemed to depend upon him alone, and he feared the burden might crush them both. But when he opened his eyes and saw her trembling under the blanket, clinging to the faintest thread of hope, even as she begged for release, something within him steadied, not with certainty but with defiance. And though his soul screamed with the memory of failure, he chose not to let it guide his hand, whispering instead that while he could not erase her pain, he could fight against the darkness that caused it, and that if she allowed him, he would stand between her and the world that had tried to destroy her, even if it cost him everything left inside. He leaned closer, his voice low but firm, telling her that he would not kill her, that he would fight for her instead. And in that moment the vow carried more weight than any oath he had spoken in war, because it was not made to command or to conquer but to protect what little hope remained inside her broken frame. And though her eyes glistened with disbelief, a flicker of something softer stirred within them as if she wanted to believe his words. Though fear held her back, so he moved without hesitation, fetching clean water from the barrel and strips of cloth he had saved from an old shirt, dipping the fabric and pressing gently against the lash marks across her back, each touch steady though his heart ached at the pain etched into her skin, whispering softly that she was safe here now, that no one would lay a hand on her again as long as he drew breath. And while she winced under the sting of the cloth, she did not pull away, instead letting her body surrender to his care. And when the wounds were dressed, he pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, knowing warmth alone could not heal, her butt determined that she would never again feel cold from cruelty, only from the night air that belonged to all men and women alike. Then, as the wind howled outside, he began to prepare, checking the locks on the doors, pushing heavy furniture against the windows, and setting his rifle within reach. For he knew the storm had not ended with the weather. The true storm was the trail of men who had broken her, life, and who would come searching. Once they realized, their prize had slipped away. And while he worked, he thought of the graves behind his ranch, the ones that marked every promise he had failed to keep, and swore to himself he would not add another, not hers, not this time, because something about the way she clung to life, even as she asked for death, told him she was meant for more than suffering. That fate had not delivered her to his gate by chance, but by design. And as he doused the lantern and sat near the fire with his rifle, resting across his knees, he felt the weight of the coming fight press against him like the air before lightning strikes. Yet he welcomed it, for the vow he had spoken was no longer a choice but a truth, and whatever rode toward his ranch in the dark would find not a broken man ready to surrender, but one willing to stand, to protect and to fight until the dawn burned the shadows away. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of fire and ash, as the rancher sat with his rifle in hand, listening to the slow, deliberate thud of hoofbeats drawing nearer, each strike against the earth carrying the weight of vengeance and unfinished blood. And in the corner of the cabin she clutched the blanket tighter, her wide eyes fixed on the door, as if it were the last barrier between her and the hell she had fled. And though fear lingered in every breath she took, there was also a fragile spark, a belief that perhaps this time someone might stand for her, someone might not turn away. The rancher rose, shoulders squared, heart steady, and with every click of the rifle he sealed a promise not only to her but to himself, that he would not let history claim another innocent under his watch. And as the hoofbeats thundered louder, the cabin seemed to tremble with the weight of fate itself, leaving only silence in the seconds before the storm broke. And sometimes in the silence before battle, a man finds the truth of who he is meant to be. What would you have done standing in his boots, to fight or to flee? To protect or to surrender? Share your thoughts below. And if this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe to keep riding with us. And watch more unforgettable tales only at Western Stories, where every echo of the West carries a lesson that still speaks today.